let me begin. I'm going to start by just a quick overview of what we're going to go over today. So this is what I've got lined up for everyone. I've got a few introductions and announcements at the beginning. I'm going to go over our tasting set, our products, a brief introduction to Gekkeikan, the sake brewery that I represent, and I'll be talking about today. Some of the basics about sake categories. I won't go into too much detail. Something about the history of cup sake in Japan. We'll talk about our product, the shot, and then I'll like to take you through some tasting together, then talk about some pairing ideas before we finish up. And hopefully I'll be able to wrap that up in about 60 minutes. But if you have any questions, feel free to put them in the group chat. If I see them and I think they're relevant and timely, I will answer them. If not, I'll maybe just skip over them and wait till the end. So good luck asking good questions. So without further ado, let's get started with some initial introductions and announcements. I'll begin with the self-introduction. My name is Mark Zheng-Garratt. I'm from Perthshire in Scotland. I've lived in Kyoto for nearly 9 years now. And I've been with Gekkeikan for just over 3 of those. And I work as an export area manager. So as it sounds, I help to export Gekkeikan products to various countries around the world. Okay. My hobbies include drinking sake, ha ha ha. And my qualifications include having drunk a lot of sake, ha ha. But actually, last time, if any of you joined me for my previous seminar I held last, I think November, I didn't have any other qualifications, and I was studying, but I have officially passed my WSET Level 3 sake qualification. So I now can speak to you with some sort of official standing. So my main message to you all today is I want you to enjoy sake, okay? I am not a super professional sommelier. I'm not wanting to make this some highbrow kind of thing. I want you to enjoy all the different parts of it, whether that's tasting it, drinking it, of course, discovering what you like and what you don't like as well is equally important. The whole fun of choosing from a wide variety of different sakes from around Japan and from other parts of the world as well. And I really want to stress that although sake does have this kind of niche product status, just by virtue of being imported from a far-off country, I really want to make it not a snobby kind of affair. So I really want to bring this whole session down, keep it very casual, and let you enjoy, and hopefully I can smooth your entry into the world of sake, okay? And why are we here today? Celebrations are in order because happy 45th birthday to Japan Center. And this is also the 10th birthday of the partnership between Japan Center and Gekkeikan. Japan Center are our main partners in the UK, and they have a very wide selection of products, of which today we have selected 3. They have a very wide selection of sake in general, more than you can find in an average supermarket or sake shop in Japan. So if you are even slightly interested in sake, which I should hope that you are if you're joining us here today, then I would recommend you have a really good look on their website and even in store for what they have on offer. And of course, one more thing, congratulations to all the fathers out there, because it is Father's Day. So thank you to all the father figures who are watching today for everything that you do. And let me gush for 10 seconds, because today, this is also my very first Father's Day as a father to this little cheeky chappy here, who is turning 7 months old in a couple of days. So anyway, let's go. Introduction to our tasting set. Now, I believe most of you should have bought or hopefully have bought a tasting set from the Japan Center, which includes these 3 products. So we have the shot, which is this black one here, which is the Daiginjo. We have the shot, this gold one, which is a Honjozo. And we have this bottle of Nigori Sake. Okay, now you are more than welcome to start drinking now. If you've already started, good on you. But if you would like to wait until I take you through the tasting session, I would recommend that you keep them in the fridge, just so they're nice and cold. These, everyone asks, what temperature do you drink sake at? These ones, I recommend you drink them all chilled, okay? So you can keep them in the fridge until we start tasting them, or you can just start sipping on them now. I don't care. Do what you want. So I will not go into too much detail about the specifics of the products today. Of these kind of these details here where you get these numbers thrown at you. This is for the people who are interested, but I want to keep it quite basic and quite casual today. So we have a kind of dry aromatic one with the black shot. We have a sweet kind of rich one with the golden one. And we have a thick, creamy Nigori Sake. So Nigori is just a cloudy sake. If you are drinking them already, make sure you give it a good shake before you pour and make sure the sediment is evenly mixed, okay? And if you really like it, you can get this in a 720 milliliter size. There you go. So without further ado, I will give a brief introduction to Gekkeikan, the maker of these three products, because I think having that background information is just a bit, makes it easier to, I don't know, it makes you appreciate the product more. So, Gekkeikan, who is this brand? Who are we? Let's have a bearing on where we are based in Japan first. So I'm going to click this and hopefully it'll take us through. We're in central Japan. We're around Kyoto. We're in a place just south of Kyoto called Fushimi. And in this Fushimi area, there are about 25, I think, plus or minus one, sake breweries. And it's a very small area, actually. But there are many, many sake breweries, and it is the #2 sake brewing region in Japan. Now, mostly because it's famous for the quality of its water. And water is extremely important for things, for making sake. Just down the road from Fushimi is the Yamazaki whiskey distillery, if any of you are into your Suntory whiskey. And just to the east of Fushimi is Uji. There's a place called Uji, and this is commonly thought of as one of the birthplaces of Japan's green tea culture, so, which also uses very high quality water. And so Fushimi is very famous as a sake brewing region, along with Nada, a place called Nada near Kobe. And these two regions account for about 50% of all sake production in Japan by volume. So it's a major brewing area of Japan, and Gekkeikan is one of the main breweries in the area, and I think the oldest, because Gekkeikan was founded in the year 1637. So for those English history buffs among you, that's around the English Civil War kind of time. And it was never known as Gekkeikan during this time. It was actually known as Kasagiya. Now, the founder was a man called Okura Jiemon, and he came from a place down south near Nara called Kasagi. And Fushimi was this up-and-coming city in the 17th century. It was becoming very prosperous, lots of activity going on, lots of trade, and of course, sake breweries started popping up all over the place. And Jiemon Okura, he set up his own sake brewery called Kasagiya, naming it after his hometown. And you know what? For the first 250 years, I'm going to say not much happened. It was a very local brewery. There were, I think, a few hundred in the area, all operating on a very small scale, catering to residents, catering to travelers, merchants, maybe doing some small scale exports to maybe nearby Osaka or Nara or something. It was a fairly local affair. And despite lots of hardships, lots of ups and downs over the centuries, Kasagiya managed to stay alive, really. Towards the end of this period, there was a huge battle and a fire in the Fushimi area, and it burned down most of the whole region. And there were not many sake breweries left, but Kasagiya was luckily one of them. So up until this point, it was a fairly standard affair. And afterwards, when we move on from 1868, this is when things become very, very interesting for Gekkeikan, or the company that we will know as Gekkeikan, because in this period of early modern Gekkeikan, I want to say, is, for those of you familiar with your Japanese history, this is when the Meiji Restoration happens. Okay, so out with the shogun, military dictator, and the emperor is reinstated. The isolationism of Japan is ended, and there's all this new information, new technology, new ideas coming in. The Western countries, including Britain, are very invested in Japan, selling industries, selling weapons, selling schools of thought. A lot of Japan's medical knowledge came from Germany, things like that. So Japan is going through this huge upheaval right now. Lots and lots of things changing very quickly. For those of you who are a fan of The Last Samurai, that was 1867, I think. So it's around that. That's the period that we're talking about, when all the samurais are disappearing and Japan's really starting to become a modern state from a predominantly Western viewpoint. So this is a very important period for Gekkeikan, because it coincides quite closely with the arrival of this man. Now, Okura Tsunekichi was the 11th generation head of the family, head of the business, and he took over in 1874. So just a few years after all this, right at the beginning of this great social upheaval in Japan. And he took over at the age of 13. Now, he was never supposed to take over. That's the story. He was the second son, and his older brother was supposed to take over. But however, his older brother suddenly died of unknown causes, or at least no one remembers them. But suddenly he died, and their father was so stricken from grief that he died soon after, as the story goes. And so as the oldest son of the family, little Tsunekichi was kind of forced to take over the family and the family business, which is the sake brewery, at the tender age of 13. So if you can imagine trying to take over any kind of serious responsibility at the age of 13, you can imagine that's going to be a very difficult mission. And of course, it was no different for Tsunekichi. But I think the reason that it's so important that it happened around this time was because he didn't know anything. He didn't know anything about operating a business or brewing sake. And so he would make this little notebook up in the top here. This is actually one of his notebooks, dated, I want to say that's maybe 1922, I think. But he started taking notes of everything that he messed up, everything he screwed up, what worked, what didn't work. And he took meticulous notes to make sure that he never reenacted these mistakes. And he really wanted to have a good grasp of what was going on. So he adopted some Western modern bookkeeping things, but really he really wanted to understand how sake was made. Up until now, sake brewing has been kind of an art form where your brewmaster, he comes in from the countryside every winter, and he comes in and he brews sake, not really understanding how it works, but knowing that it does work. And so at this time, we didn't know things about yeast. about, microorganisms, why things work, why doesn't. So he wanted to change how this worked. So he set up Gekkeikan's own sake research institute. And that's what you can see here in the background. And this was him wanting to really demystify this, change it from an art into a science. And no other company had a research institute at this time. There was one brewing institute run by the government, but Gekkeikan's was the first owned by a company, and many of the discoveries and innovations that they ended up discovering at this time would eventually become some of the standard practices of the sake industry. So some of the modern methods that we have now can trace their origins back to the Research Institute here, and I think it was set up in 1909. So it's been going around for over 110 years now. And this dedication to innovation and creativity and trying to develop new ideas is something that has really defined Gekkeikan over the past century, and something that really defines us still. And it's all thanks to this young man here. And so he came up with the brand name Gekkeikan. And that Gekkeikan, the word, it literally means laurel wreath. So this wreath of laurel that you see on the brand here, you can see it in our products. This kind of stylized wreath here, at the very least, is it's to symbolize the commitment to becoming the champion of sake brewing. And so he really turned the company on its head, came up with great new ideas, such as this bottle in the bottom left. It's a bottle of sake that comes with a drinking cup attached onto it. So you could drink it on the move, for example, on the train. And this little cup, it swings. So it swings with the rocking of the train, so you don't spill it. And things like this were very, very popular, and they spread throughout Japan. And the name of Gekkeikan rose very, very quickly during this period, as to be known as one of the best sake brewers in the country. And so during Tsunekichi's career, I guess, his tenure as head of the brewery, he expanded their business by 500 times. So it was 500 times bigger when he left it as compared to when he took over. So it's really this great creativity and desire to innovate that I want you to remember, because we'll talk about that very soon. But I'll take this moment to remind people on the sake basics now. As I said, I don't want to go into too much specific detail about what makes X sake category this and that. I want to kind of keep it quite casual and light today. If you do want to know more, I did a couple of other seminars for the Japan Center last year, and they go into a bit more detail. So you can look on YouTube. If you search for Japan Center Gekkeikan, they should hopefully come up. They're each an hour long, but they go into a bit more detail about the production process and all the different categories and things like that. But so today I will go over this quite briefly. And I want to just make sure that we all have a good understanding of the definition of sake. And sake is a fermented alcoholic beverage, okay? So it's not distilled. A lot of people see the clear liquid and they think it's distilled, but it is not. That's why some people call it a kind of rice wine. It's not. It is made from water, of course, we talked about that earlier. And it's made from milled or polished rice. And it's made from this thing called rice koji, okay? I'll talk about that very soon. Sometimes there is distilled, or sometimes called brewer's alcohol added, and I can explain that later. But I want to tell you why it's not a wine, okay? In general, you need two things to make alcohol. You need yeast, a microorganism, and you need to feed it glucose. You need to feed it sugar, okay? Yeast will eat sugar and create ethanol, alcohol, and carbon dioxide, So for wine, you take your grapes, you mash them up, you get all the juice. There's loads and loads of sugar in there. You get some wine yeast. The yeast might be naturally floating around in the air, or it might be added. Throw it all together, leave it for a bit, ferments, and you have wine. Obviously incredibly simplified, but that's the basic idea, okay? When we use grains, like barley or wheat or rice, these grains contain a lot of their energy stored as starch. Now, starch is just a very big version of glucose, a big version of sugar. So you have lots of sugar bits that make up one starch. And so in order for the yeast to make alcohol, we need to chop up this starch into lots of bits of sugar. And when we make beer, for example, we take barley and we malt it. So that's basically tricking the grains to start growing. They start changing all that starch into sugar themselves. Then you dry it out, you stop it from growing any further, and then you have these grains that are full of sugar. And then you throw it all together with your yeast and your hops and your water, you let it ferment, and boom, you have beer. Again, extremely simplified, but you get the idea. There's a separate step that you have to do to create the sugar for the yeast. With rice, however, specifically with sake, we mill the rice, we polish the rice, and I'll talk about why we do that in just a moment. But we can't trick the rice to grow in the same way that we can do with barley. And so how do we get all this starch that's locked inside these rice grains and we change it into sugar? And we use this thing called Gekkeikan. Now, Gekkeikan is a fungus. It's like a mold, just like you get mold in cheese. It's perfectly safe, don't worry. It is used, it's kind of sprinkled over rice, steamed rice, and it grows. It's allowed to grow over rice over about a couple of days. And the end result is this thing you see in the bottom right. It's kind of like this fluffy looking rice. And this is it covered in mold, essentially. And what this mold does is it buries its little tendrils into the rice grains and turns the starch into sugar for us. So without this Gekkeikan, we will have no rice koji. And without rice koji, we'll have no sugar. Without sugar, no fermentation, no alcohol, no sake. You get the picture. So this is an extremely simplified method where we take rice, we use some of it to make rice koji, and we mix that rice koji with the rest of the rice, we add some yeast, and this process where the starch is being converted into sugar and the sugar being converted into alcohol is happening at the same time. And that is the unique thing about sake. That's why we can't call it a wine. That's why we don't call it a beer. It's sake. And this process is called multiple parallel fermentation. But don't worry, I will not be having a test on this at the end of the lecture. So this is the unique thing that makes sake sake. And why do we polish rice? I said I'd answer this. Basically, everyone says that eating brown rice is better for you than eating white rice. It's got more minerals, more proteins, more fats, all that good stuff, more fiber. But this is all the same stuff that can really upset the balance, the natural balance of the microorganisms that are making sake. If you give them too much food in form of protein and minerals, they'll grow too fast, they'll go crazy, they'll die. You know, you get all these different off flavors. And so they realized at some point in the past that if you polish rice, you get a more pure and refined flavor to the point where you can get very highly polished rice. So these numbers here, if I say sake has a rice polishing ratio of 60%, that means the outer 40 has been removed, okay? And so you're left with the inner 60% of the rice. And so the closer you get to the center, the more pure a source of starch you will have. That's the thinking anyway, okay? And why is this important? Is because it defines our categories of sake. Okay, so rice polishing ratio at the top, going down more and more polished. And on the left here, we have non-junmai, and on the right, we have junmai. So you have basically this going down more premium, going down with the rice polishing ratio, because there's more effort, more care, more cost involved in making these very refined, elegant sakes. Left to right, some styles have alcohol added to them, that distilled brewer's alcohol that I was talking about earlier. Some styles have that. That's these non-junmai ones. Some styles don't. These are the junmai ones. This is completely a stylistic thing. A lot of people think that junmai is inherently better for that reason, but I would really like to argue against that and just say it's a stylistic thing, much like, perhaps this is a poor example, but single malt whiskey versus blended whiskey. A lot of people think single malt is the purest form, but there are plenty of exceptional blended whiskeys out there as well. So that's the point I really want to make today, because that's a very big misconception that I feel a lot of people have regarding sake. Now, again, I won't go into too much detail, but making sake is a very complex process that really, we are providing an environment for microorganisms to make sake. We're not making it. So by changing any number of variables, we can create a whole variety of different types of different flavors. And so there are many types that you can find. And one of the things that I've enjoyed about knowing sake, learning about sake, is discovering all these different types and how different they can be. Gekkeikan has a pretty wide variety of different types, but by no means all types. So please feel free to, shop around, find what you like, is what I want to say. Okay. And with that first half of the seminar done, I'll take a very quick break. I think I haven't noticed some chat questions coming up. Okay, no super important questions, but thank you for the comments anyway. So I will take a very quick sip of tea. And I will continue with talking about the history of cup sake. Now, it's not a history lesson, don't worry. I want to kind of set the stage by talking about what cup sake is. Now, so-called cup sake is found almost everywhere in Japan. This is a Gekkeikan product you can see here, and it forms the basis for the two of our products today, the shot. But we have to go back in time to the first 1964 Tokyo Olympics, because there will be a second. Have faith, everyone. There'll be a second Tokyo Olympics this year, 2020. One of Japan's greatest sake brands, Ozeki, basically revolutionized the sake industry with their mega hit product, 1 cup Ozeki. Now, I actually have one here. Now, this, if anyone has been to Japan, you've almost certainly seen one of these in a convenience store or a supermarket. They are very common, and they are very popular because they were the very first to pioneer this type of product. And now it comes in a glass jar. It's a cup, but it's really a jar. A kind of foil or an aluminium cap that you peel off like this, and they're nearly always in this 180 milliliter size. Okay. Now there are many of these. This is a photo I took earlier. Some of these are now empty for research purposes, of course. But many products exist like this in Japan, and they follow this same pattern. And I want to talk about very briefly why 180 milliliters. Okay, now I believe some of you have received or have gotten your hands on a little square cup like the ones on the screen now. These are called masu cups. Okay, now they are used in a variety of different ways with regards to sake, but originally they would be used to scoop rice, for example, and to measure out rice. And this is part of Japan's kind of 10-scale decimal system that they've been using for centuries. And so let me talk about, so one shaku is about 18 grams or milliliters, okay? So I say grams or milliliters because this is rice and sake. And you can have one go. Now, one go is usually the traditional size of one of these square boxes. I believe the people who have them, the size is not one go, it's about 8 shaku. So anyway, one go is one scoop of rice, 180 milliliters. That's why these cup sakes are 180 milliliters. Why 180 milliliters? 10 go make a sho. That's where you get those big bottles. 10 sho make a to, 18 liters, and 10 to make 1 koku. Now, 1 koku is the equivalent of about 180 kilograms or liters. Officially, it's about 180.39, but let's just call it 180. And 1 koku of rice was decided to be roughly the amount of rice that was required to feed a single person for 1 year. Imagine eating 180 kilograms of rice in your entire year. I don't know. People didn't have much to eat back a few hundred years ago. Okay, but that's why this measurement system exists, and that's why these cup sake products are this size. Now, you also see this in other sizes. So you get the standard bottles of 720 milliliters, that's 4 go, and then you get your big magnum bottles, which are 10 go or 1 sho. For the 300 milliliter size bottles, I looked everywhere. I could not find a conclusive answer as to why they are 300 milliliter bottles. So before anyone asks me, I don't know. If anyone has the answer, I would love to hear from you, because there were a whole bunch of different reasons that were being thrown around on the internet. I could not find a conclusive one as to why it was absolutely had to be 300. It would make sense for it to be 360, but who knows? Anyway, going back to our mega hit product, the 1 cup ozeki. It was sold in train stations just around when the Olympics were happening. It was one of the early products to be included in the first alcoholic beverage vending machines in Japan. They still exist, by the way. They're still everywhere. You just kind of have to look for them. They sell, obviously, small products. And this English label, this catchy design for, you know, the 1960s, this was very new and very modern for Japan. And so younger audiences were actually very interested in this. It was very popular. And ever since then, these small size, convenient size products have been popular in Japan. Now, basically all the big brands, including Gekkeikan, jumped on this. Here's a Gekkeikan one here. Here's one from Shochikubai. You know, all the big companies have their own cup sake products ever since then. It's mostly the big companies, but some smaller breweries will release their own like kind of craft sake in their mini bottles as well. So you can have a look out for them. But that's why these products are so popular across Japan. Unfortunately, though, with time, cup sake earned a kind of unfortunate reputation as being kind of a cheap old man's drink. You know, as time goes on, the people who were buying this when they were young, yeah, they were young once, but now they're old. And so they kind of became synonymous with, like, you know, old men. And so they got a really bad rep. And unfortunately, that kind of spread to the rest of the sake industry to the point where sake is not such a popular drink among younger generations in Japan. If you look at this graph, basically what it is saying is that people in their 60s and 70s now are spending about twice as much as younger generations spend on sake. And so there's this huge generational gap. And the million-pound question is, how do we get people who don't drink sake, usually, to start drinking, have an open mind, and start liking sake? Now, interestingly, this same challenge is present in both Japan and overseas. This is why I'm here talking to you. A lot of people are interested in sake, but they don't really know much about it. The same thing is happening in Japan among younger generations. And so how do you get people to be excited about sake? How do you get them to want to try sake products? And this is where Gekkeikan tried to innovate and try to be creative with a product called the shot. And so this was developed a couple of years ago as a reimagining, a kind of a modern twist on this cupsake product. So if this is our classic cup here, this is the new fancy one, and it's, you can see that a lot of effort is being put into the design. It's trying to engage younger audiences with something new. So we've got big, bold, fruity flavors. We're not trying to talk about sake categories very much. We keep the same price, despite these are two different types of sake, two different production costs, all that stuff, but the same price for the consumer, because we don't want people to start judging on category and all that. We want people to buy what they like, okay? And of course, we keep this 180 milliliter size because it's a convenient size for everyone to buy. Now, I've got a couple of questions here. Maybe I will answer these at the end, okay? Please, I appreciate your patience. I don't want to be bogged down too much with questions in this early point. I want to get over what I wanted to talk about, and I'm very, very happy to stay and answer your questions afterwards. So your patience is appreciated. So I want to now go into tasting together. Now, again, I am going to keep this very casual, and I say this with the utmost respect, but it is very easy to kind of, when you hear wine sommeliers and people talking about the tasting notes of wine, and they say it smells like a cellar door, or after a wet dog has run through a field or something, and you're like, what? I don't understand any of these things that this person is saying, and I don't want to go that far, but I will say that imagination is really important for tasting. So I'm going to try and guide you through this. Almost all of these steps are optional. So for those of you who have your sake in the fridge, take a minute to go get them. I'm going to take a little drink. Now, optional step 1, pour your sake into an appropriate tasting glass or vessel. I say this is optional because it's already in these two are already in a drinking vessel, okay? You just need to screw the cap open and you're good to go, okay? For the nigori, if you want to drink out of the bottle, be my guest. I would recommend you pour it into a glass. If you like thinking about tastings and things, I use one of these. I don't know if you can see that very well. It's a tasting glass like this. Any wine glass is fine for sake, but again, really you don't have to think too much about this. Only if you're a nerd about this like me. So if you are still with me, you want to decide on an order. Again, optional. try to go from light and dry and clean flavors to heavy, sweet, powerful, rich flavors. So I'm going to start with this one, and then I'm going to go to this one, and then I'm going to go to this one. Again, drink them in whatever order you want. By just if you have a very rich one first, sometimes it can it makes anything that comes after taste very thin. You know, you get the same thing with food as well, right? So the first thing is to breathe in the aromas. You see what you can smell and identify. Again, optional. Take a sip and you let it cover your whole mouth and tongue before swallowing. And what flavors do you recognize? You don't have to start drinking them now. I'll take you through it in just a moment. Then we're going to try breathing from our mouth and throat up through our nose. This is kind of difficult if you haven't tried this before, but it's like if you keep some sake in your mouth and you keep your lips closed and you try and exhale through your mouth and nose. I apologize if I'm making some of you spit up sake, but you can. This is what is called retronasal olfaction. So instead of sniffing something, you sniff it through the back of your throat. Anyway, optional. What is the sensation as the tastes and the aromas fade? Do they linger? We were basically talking about what's the finish of this sake? What's its lasting impression? Okay, again, optional. We don't need to think about it. What I do want you to do, this is mandatory if you're taking a sake tasting classes for me, is enjoy it, have an open mind, and try and get ready for, try and have another sip, because sometimes you can have a completely different perception of a flavor just with 5 minutes or another drink in between, okay? So let's go with the shot. Now this is the black one that I want to start with. It's the Daiginjo, but again, we don't really care about the category. Give it a good twist, and you hear that nice sound. That's the sound of a good time. Okay, now already you might be able to get some aromas. So what I'm not going to try and smell it. And what I want you to do is imagine the smells of the words that I'm about to say. I'm going to throw some words at you, and I want you to imagine what those things smell like. And as you're smelling that, see if you can smell that in the sake. Okay? This is what tasting is all about. So I'm going to say apple, melon, might have some banana in there. We've certainly got some pear. We've got something sweet like bubble gum, maybe even peach. Like, can you imagine biting into a peach and the smell of the peach? And then you might get something sweet and maybe tangy like peach if you smell. If you don't get it, that's absolutely fine. It took me a very, very long time for me to be able to come up and make tasting note things like this. So it's just all about practice, and using your imagination is really, really important. So again, we're going to do this for the palate. So take a sip, everyone. I'm going to take one with you. Cheers. Kanpai, all that. What do you get? Now, this will be hard while I'm speaking, but it's quite a dry, quite clean on the palate. Might not be if you're not used to sake, and that's fine. I get more flavors of apple and pear and melon. You get these like white fruits, maybe something sweet like lychee. There's certainly some kind of acidic flavor, kind of like yogurt. And some of you might feel a kind of almost like a tangy bitterness at the end that I would like to call astringency. It might be kind of like anise for you. That's quite a common flavor in sake. You might just think it is kind of bitter. That's fine. Generally, if you leave sake to warm up a bit it will taste less bitter. And what's the finish? It's not super long. I'm still talking. I can, if I think about it, I think I still have something in my mouth that I'm remembering. But it's quite refreshing. That acidity is quite refreshing. It's quite clean, quite dry, and it kind of makes me want to take another sip. So overall, we've got quite a fruity, aromatic, but quite clean sake. Now, the second one, I'm going to do the exact same thing. This is the gold one here, the Honjozo. Let's have another sound of a good time. Yeah. Now this one will smell very different. Now, I want to say that this, if you are not getting this, I think this might be one of the easier things to identify if you're not familiar with tasting anything in particular. If you're not familiar with tasting or thinking about something you eat or drink as much as we are right now, this might be one of the easier ones. I'm going to start, it's banana. And in particular, it's kind of almost that that banana flavor or smell that you get in a, you know, that in banana smoothies, like those, that almost like artificial banana smell, right? And it's very thick, very sweet. I get something creamy, and I want to say, like, you know, when you get like a melon soda with vanilla ice cream, what do you call it? A float, right? Something like that. Something creamy and sweet, but really it's just all banana up in here is what I get anyway. Okay. And oh, I wrote something else. Creamy. Next thing, palate. So I'm going to do the same thing. Everyone take a sip, and you're going to, it's going to be very different from the first one. So you'll notice that this is much thicker around your mouth. Even after swallowing, you still feel it coating your mouth. It's very mouth coating. That's the technical term, imagine. And quite sticky, and really lots of banana, very sugary. I get melon, I get maybe mango, something like that. I don't know. And there's a certain riciness, like a certain kind of steamed rice, cereally kind of flavor way in the back. That will be something that I imagine more of you will find more difficult to identify. But again, this just comes with practice. I'm not a super professional sommelier. I just like drinking sake. And the finish, it's quite thick, it's sticky, it lingers in your mouth. I can still kind of feel that banana flavor hanging around in my mouth. And for better or for worse. Some people like that, some people don't. And when we talk about food pairings, that will have an effect. Excuse me. Now, last one. We're going to do the exact same with the nigori sake. Make sure you give that a good shake so the sediment is evenly mixed throughout. And I will pour this into my tasting glass here. Now, the advantage of having a tasting glass like this is that you can give it a good swirl, and you can have the aromas kind of concentrated in. But again, a wine glass will work. If not, drink it out of a mug. Who cares? Enjoy it the way you want to enjoy it. Again, we're going to go start with the nose, the aromas. And this one I find is very interesting because you get a lot of this rice flavor, but it's almost kind of like a Play-Doh smell. If some of you are if you're familiar with that, you might know what I'm talking about. It's kind of like this almondy kind of sweet. I can only describe it as a kind of Play-Doh smell, but you get this very thick rice aroma as well. Now, if you take a sip, again, this will be very, very different from the other ones we had. Immediately, it's very thick. You've got all that rice sediment. The reason it's cloudy is that it's when it's made in the exact same way as other sakes, but when we press it, when we filter it, really, we use a much rougher mesh, and so it lets more of the sediment of the rice through. Now that rice sediment has lots of sweetness, lots of acidity locked in it, so there's lots and lots of flavor in that. So it's not just the color, you get this creamy, milky, almost like a yogurty flavor to it. It's almost like you know, drinking Yakult or something, you know, one of those probiotic drinks. And you get this very thick, almost like grainy finish that kind of hangs around for a while, but then it's actually quite dry and surprisingly refreshing. And it's that acidity that you get from this sake that'll make it refreshing. So now that we've had our initial tastings done, let's talk about pairing ideas. Now, food pairing ideas, I should say. Now, again, I will emphasize that I am not a chef or someone who, you know, specializes in food pairing ideas, and I haven't really tried any of these in particular. But these are just ideas that I came up with that people predominantly in the UK. I know you're not all joining us from the UK today, but that you might be able to get your hands on quite easily. So sake is very easy to pair with many foods. It's quite it's not as aggressive as wine. It's not the main focus usually. It's often supports food. But using your imagination is really important, like with tasting, but it's very important to use your imagination, try and think about what this could go well with. Now, I'm going to talk about some basic pairing concepts. You can either contrast flavors that offset or, you know, not cancel each other out, but go well together. So, you know, you have salty Stilton cheese with sweet pork. That's the kind of the classic one. This is why you have that rich acidic vinegar on your fish and chips. You've got all that grease in the fish and chips that you want to cut through with some acidity, make it bright. And that's why also ketchup goes really well with fish and chips. You know, you balance them against one another. Yes. Complementing flavors, on the other hand, that's, for example, sweet with sweet, rich with rich. Roast beef and rich gravy obviously taste better together than if you had them, you know, if you have a cup of gravy and you drink it. Although fans of Bovril may want to contest that, I don't know. So that you've got your contrasting and your complementing ideas. Those are the basic concepts. Of course, you also want to avoid pairing unbalanced things where, for example, either the food or the drink is going to completely overpower the flavors of the other one. So an easy example is, you know, people always say you never drink red wine with seafood, and it's because red wine can really be quite bold and very full-bodied, whereas a lot of seafood can be the flavor of the fish or the prawns or what have you can often be quite light and delicate, and so you're getting, yes, you're tasting that delicious red wine perhaps, but you're losing all that nice flavor of the fish. And you want to avoid flavors that create unpleasant combinations. And the classic one I always say is toothpaste and orange juice. Not because mint and orange don't go well together, but something in toothpaste basically stops you from sensing all the sweetness of orange juice, just leaving you with acid and bitterness. So that's why that's a bad mix, actually. So when we think about what should we pair our sake with? Okay, we take the main components of, for example, this daiginjo here. It's very aromatic, it's quite fruity. I get lots of apple and melon. It's quite dry, it's quite clean. It's not overly powerful, but it's got a really nice refreshing acidity. So what are my initial ideas? Something light and clean. So again, seafood, that would be a complementing idea. Or on the other hand, we could go with something fatty or something oily, where you contrast it. You use that light, dry palate to help cleanse your mouth after something oily. And can we make interesting use of these fruity flavors? So my idea, again, this comes with the big disclaimer that I have not tried this as much as I would like to, roast pork. Okay, so for those of you, anyone who's thinking of having a Sunday roast tonight, maybe consider getting pork. Pork and apple is a classic match, as everyone knows. The dry palate and the acidity of the sake will help to kind of cut through the fattiness of the pork meat. Maybe something like pork belly, though, would be too rich compared to something a little leaner like the loin or pork fillet. A vegetarian option, feta cheese salad. Sake and cheese is often a really, really good mix. A lot of cheese can be quite salty, and that goes well with the umami in sake. Fresh cheese and light sake, and on the other hand, mature cheese and rich sake. And there's lots of olive oil in something like a Greek salad as well, so that could go quite well with this sake. Moving on, I feel like I'm running out of time a little bit, so I might go through this quite quickly. The honjozo, this gold one here, it's very sweet. It's very, very sweet. We've got lots of strong banana flavors. It's very, very fruity, quite rich, quite in your face, quite powerful, and it's quite tangy. It's got quite a lot of acidity. You get that feeling at the back of your mouth around here, right? So my thoughts for this: something sweet, so could go well with a dessert, or something spicy. Now, sweet and spicy. Think of sweet chili sauce. Sweet and spicy is a pretty good pairing. But also, can we make interesting use of the banana flavors? Is the ideas, okay? Now, my initial thoughts: buffalo chicken wings and banoffee pie, okay? So with the chicken wings, you get something, they get that very tangy, really rich, spicy sauce. Sometimes you have the blue cheese dip with it. I think this would go really quite well. Both very bold, powerful flavors. Put them together, who knows? That's what I'm thinking. On the other hand, if you double down on the banana flavor, double down on the sweet, and pair this with a banoffee pie, I bet that would go really well with that caramel and that biscuit base, or not caramel, toffee, sorry. I can see that going really well. And sweet sakes with a dessert is often a very good idea. And speaking of sweet sakes, the nigori at the end, very sweet and fruity, thick, creamy, it's tangy. Can we make use of the color? But overall, it's very rich as well, right? So can we pair this with something sweet, again, as a complement, or something spicy? Or, can we make interesting use of this thick, creamy texture? Could it go with something fatty, perhaps? My initial ideas: chicken tikka masala, okay? So you've got that creamy coconut base of this curry. You've got that creamy sake. Both are very tangy, lots and lots of flavor. And again, this is building on that sweet and spicy go very well together. And what if you tried drizzling some over the chicken, or dipping some chicken into the sake? That could be interesting. Who knows? Or just very simply with ice cream. This could be vanilla ice cream. It could be chocolate ice cream. Pour some over, or eat it with. I bet that would be really, really good. And it adds a little bit of texture as well. So these are the kind of things that I think about when I was imagining what would be something that my listeners or my audience can relate with, and that would go well. So I must apologize that I haven't actually tried any of these. If you would like to let me know somehow, or let Japan Center know if you did try this and whether it was good or not. Would love to hear it from you. I just had this before we started, this nigori with some no, it wasn't chicken, it was spicy sausage and pesto pasta. And it went very, very well, actually. So, you know, it's really, it's up to you to just try things. Very rarely with sake are you going to get a bad pairing, is what I'd like to end on. Now, I know we're just over about an hour now, so final announcements. Coming to a Japan Center near you this autumn with a big asterisk, because shipping is all over the place right now. It's very chaotic. Hopefully this autumn we will have 2 new additions to the shop lineup. We've got this red one and we've got this white one. As I said, hopefully that will be on sale sometime this autumn, but that could well change. Keep an eye out. So the red one is a junmai. Now I really like this one. It's very, almost kind of like a sweet and sour kind of feel. It's very, very tropical, really fruity, lots of pineapple and mango is what I get from this. Quite tropical, very bright, really interesting. I enjoyed this with some yakiniku, which is, you know, Japanese barbecue with that thick, tangy, sweet sauce that you get with the meat. And this was one of the best combinations I've had in my life of anything. It was so, so good. The nigori is the white one, and this gets lots of grape, some peach, some yogurt flavors. And it's not quite as thick as this one we have here, so if you don't like the thick texture, that might be more up your street. Personally, I'm not always a fan of the thicker nigori sakes, but I really like this one too. So that brings us to the end of this official 1 hour of my sake seminar lecture. Really, I wanted it to be more of a chat. So if you do have questions, I think I see 17 notifications in the chat bar. So I will read through them in just a moment. But please keep an eye out for some other birthday deals that might be coming up but with Gekkeikan and Japan Center in the coming months. Congratulations again to the Japan Center for their 45th birthday, and to all the fathers who are listening. And thank you all so, so much for joining me here today. Let me go through the chat just now. Now, hold on, I feel like I missed a few. So please, if you would like to ask directly over voice, maybe try one at a time, but let me see. I've been to Japan on a few occasions and I don't read Japanese, so how would I know a good sake? Do I look at the area it's produced? Basically, what do I look for? Oof, big question. Okay, I think this is obviously a disadvantage for you at in one respect, but I think it can also be an advantage because you're not coming in with any preconceptions of what you're buying. It's a surprise for you, and so a lot of times your preconceptions of what you're buying can affect your satisfaction with the end product as well. So on the back, even if this is all written in Japanese, you'll often see at the very least some percentage. Okay, now this is almost certainly, if there is one, not the alcohol percentage, but especially if it's you know, a big number, it's going to be the rice polishing ratio. Okay, and so if you are looking for something fruitier, you want to look for a lower percentage number. If you're wanting something drier or more robust or earthy, you want to look for a higher number. although sometimes they don't write them when it's a futsushu sake. So that would, if you have nothing else to go on, that's what I would recommend. A lot of bottles will have somewhere written on them, somewhere in English, the very basic information. I know that's a trend these days. For example, this one just says Nigori Sake. This one here just, I think, says Japanese sake on it somewhere. So it'll really depend on the label, but I know that Google Translate, for example, you hold up the camera to it. I think it can do an okay job, although I haven't tried it myself. That's what I would recommend. So thank you for that question, Des. Philippe, does Gekkeikan also have some handmade products? I mean, in my mind, Gekkeikan is industrial, good sake, but with modern methods and very industrial. Can you make me wrong? Yes. So in fact, right back, we have, this is a bottle of Gekkeikan sake, and it was specifically handcrafted for entry into the National Japan Sake Awards. Now, this is basically the ultimate expression of Gekkeikan quality. I have one because I bought it from work recently because I wanted to drink it. We do have some handcrafted or some sakes that are made in a more traditional manner. The building you see behind me, that virtual background, this is actually our old brewery, and it's still active. And although, yes, we use modern technology and techniques to temperature control, all that, the sake that's made in that brewery is generally made by hand. And so you have all the science and the technology behind it, but all the traditional methods of creating it. And if you're ever able to come to Japan in the near future, you can come and you can try some of the sake that's brewed there in our sake museum. So thank you for your question, Philippe. Yegas has asked, what is the ideal shelf life of sake sold in tins? Do you mean like a can, perhaps? Now, a tin, I think, generally speaking, like with beer, cans or tins are very good, actually, at keeping the quality of products. They have a very good seal. They travel very well. And so what I would say for is that it should be the same as any sake, and that's best within 1 year of the production date. So ideally, so maybe you might see on the top, on the cap of your products, you'll see a date. It should be like 2020 or something, or 2021 if it was a recent one, and the month. If you have a look at that, ideally, if you can get it within a year of the production date, then it's going to be fine generally, unless it's a very specific specialty style sake that needs to be refrigerated, for example. But generally speaking, I would say a year, max 2. Otherwise, you're starting to see a deterioration in the flavor. And once it's still drinkable, it's fine. It'll just be different. Okay. Your follow-up question was, please explain konbini. That is a convenience store. That's the Japanese word for a convenience store. The shot is a glass bottle. Oh yeah, thank you, Chaz, for answering. Does Gekkeikan work on an international basis? Yes, we export to, I think it's close to 50 countries around the world. So North America, you can find it almost anywhere. East Asia, almost anywhere. Europe, you might have to look at more specific places, but we are there. And if you have, basically, you can probably find us in most of major markets, I would like to think. Okie dokie. Out of interest on the Nigori, what is the level of sweetness, please? Grams per liter. I'm sorry, Yegas, I do not have that information for you off the top of my head. I can tell you that it is -23 on the sake meter value. The more negative a number, the more sweet it is. I can't tell you how sweet it is in terms of grams per liter, though, I'm afraid. Sorry. And okay, do you use sake in food recipes? Yes, cooking sake, or sake can always be used in food. It can add lots of umami, lots of hidden depth and flavor to sake. I would not recommend using some super premium sake like this one, but anything that you can buy in volume and in quite cheap for a reasonable price would be absolutely very good for use in cooking. Some of our Gekkeikan standard products are ideal for this, for, you know, the classic drink some, pour some in the stew kind of thing. Could you make an ice cream with the nigori, perhaps? Good luck. I'm sure it exists somewhere. I'm sure there's a nigori sorbet or something. I have had a kind of slushy before with the nigori, and it was good. Olivia asking, how much sake does a normal person consume annually? Olivia, I'm not a normal person when it comes to sake consumption. You're asking the wrong person. It is, I couldn't tell you, I'm afraid. I don't have average data on that off the top of my head. I wish I did, but it's almost certainly less than your host today. Thank you for the congratulations on my first Father's Day. Is sake meant to be aged by like wine? Is that Hezkia? I'm sorry if I'm saying that wrong. I may have just mentioned that in my previous answer. Sake generally is not something to be aged. It doesn't like being aged. As I said, sake will tend to deteriorate over time. It kind of gets a bit more mellow for sure, but then after that it kind of tastes a bit stale. It tastes a bit fusty, if anyone understands that. I would, once you open a bottle of sake, I would want to drink it between, you know, ideally within a week or two, if you keep it in the fridge, and you screw the cap on quite tightly. For other types, for unpasteurized types of sake, for example, you have to drink them much more quickly, otherwise they'll go bad. So I would recommend not opening it and keeping it open for a long time. However, if you do and you taste it and it kind of tastes off, absolutely fine to use in cooking, like we just talked about. Okay. Or sometimes older sake, if you heat it up, it can taste quite actually nice and mellow and rounded. Okay. I will say there's one exception to this rule, and that is purposefully aged sake. But that is not sake that one ages or matures themselves. That will be a sake that the brewer has purposefully aged before bottling or after bottling. Now, these are often designed to age, to turn to something that ages well. And so I think it's a minimum of 3 years, but sometimes you get, 10 years or something. You get lots of these soy flavors, caramel, toffee, these kind of sugary flavors that develop with very old sake. So I guess to answer the question honestly, sake is old up until a while, and then it's bad, and then it's purposefully aged. Okay, if you're patient enough, it's purposefully aged. And I think, are there any restrictions when consuming sake, like can be consumed after eating something? No. Sake is very much something that has been drunk for many hundreds of years. It's It has yes, it has been used in religious purposes in Japan, but I don't think there are any real taboos with regards to drinking sake, so don't worry about that. Although if you do have a bad pairing, well, sorry. But maybe just avoid that in the future. That's all I would say. Okay, big question from Daria. Is that it? If there are so strong aromas like banana or orange, is there any point when it turns sake into just a kind of alcoholic sweet drink? Well, I mean, you could say that about anything, I would say, but I think especially recently, I will say, there has been a trend in sake to be much more fruity, much more aromatic. That's generally the trend in what people are preferring these days. Now, if you get something, like your very traditional cup sakes, these will be quite dry, very, very down to earth, very basic. And some people like that. I like this kind of sake too. I don't prefer when a sake is very, very fruity and aromatic. And I prefer a bit more of a homely taste. So I think this just comes down to preference. The trend is for more fruity sakes these days, but it's really up to you to decide what you like or do not like. Do you use these small traditional Japanese sake cups nowadays? Yes, I have a few in my cupboard that I use, especially when I've got warm sake. So it's easy to pour into a little cup and just sip on some warm sake. The rest of the sake stays warmer for longer that way. For those of you who have a little masu square cup, one of the interesting, fun ways that people serve sake, especially in restaurants, is they'll put a glass in that square cup inside it and pour until the glass overflows into the square cup. And it's kind of like a sign of generosity as well. So if you want to try that, be my guest as well. But yes, to answer your question, Daria, then yes, those small sake cups are very, very common still. I think I answered your question as well, Yulia, I want to say. Once you open it, keep it in the fridge and drink it as soon as you can. Someone mentioned aged sakes. Koshu, yes. Prefer sake when warmed? Yes, Des. There is a stigma about warm sake. People will say that only bad quality sake is drunk warm or served warm, and that's to mask the flavors. I think there's an element of truth to that when in decades past, the general quality of sake was much lower than it is now. And knowledge about sake and serving sake was less. And the sake flavor does change quite a lot when you warm it, but that is by no means to say that warm sake or sake served warm is poor quality. I like to warm quite a lot of different types of sake, different temperatures, and although I wouldn't recommend any of these ones that we have today warm, you are absolutely welcome to try some. I would pour some into a little cup, try and put it in a hot water bath, or if you're feeling brave with the microwave controls, do it. But you'll see how incredibly different the sake is once it's warm. Thank you, Philippe, who looked up about 4 liters per person per year. That's how much sake people drink, apparently. Thank you very much. Oh, Daria, I answered your question before I even read it. Enjoy warming sake or chilling sake as you wish. Not all good sake is served chilled, not all bad sake is served warm. There's a whole lot of variation, and the general level of sake, the quality of sake these days is very, very good. So again, this comes down to preference. Mark asking, do you ever drink sake on ice or add things like a lemon slice to it? Okay, good question. There are some, Gekkeikan actually has a product specifically designed to be drunk over ice. Now these are kind of released only in the summer, and they're quite high alcohol percentage, and so there may be 18 or 19%. And so as they kind of melt the ice, they get watered down a bit. But yes, absolutely feel free to drink sake on ice on a hot day. Just note that it will very much mute the flavors when it gets cold, and it will also water it down a bit naturally. So same thing with, you know, if any of you drink whiskey over ice, you'll notice that the melted ice will completely change the flavor. So just be aware of that. Adding things like a lemon slice to it, a very famous, I guess, sake cocktail, officially, I guess it's a cocktail, is called the Samurai, and essentially just sake and lime juice. So you can squeeze lime juice or pour lime juice into a serving of sake, and that is called a Samurai. Very popular, quite tasty. I would recommend that you try it, although it will, again, if it's something with a very high quality sake, you might regret it. So, you know, be sparing with your enthusiasm, I say. Okay. I think, are aromatics ever added to sake, like in gin? I'm going to say as a general rule, no. But there's a few, I would say, flavored sake. The most common ones you get are lemon and lime, and you get yuzu. You get yuzu sake. Yuzu shu is what it's known as. Now, for those of you who are unfamiliar, yuzu is kind of like a lemon, but it's a bit more bitter. It's not quite as sour as a normal lemon, but this is quite a common style of flavored sake, I will say. So if you see one, definitely be sure to try it. They are quite tasty. Okay. Do we have any other questions? Thank you, Philippe. You've been looking up all sorts of different things and helping to answer questions throughout this. I appreciate that. As I've been making my way through the questions, that's helping a lot. But I hope that you have enjoyed this today, for those of you who are still remaining with us. And thank you so much for taking part, for all your questions. Really appreciate you coming and joining with us today. And please be sure to visit the Japan Center, wish them a happy birthday, and of course, everyone stay safe, and I hope to welcome you to Japan and maybe to Fushimi one day in the near future. I hope to go home soon too. So thank you very much indeed. Everyone have a very good day, and congratulations again to all those on Father's Day. Thank you very much indeed.